Hey all, another Spotlight with Context. Today we are talking about the leader, the big brain villain. Associated with the Hulk, his whole shtick is that he gets smarter and smarter the way the Hulk gets stronger and stronger. And I think that that's been expressed in this kit in some really interesting ways. Gonna completely skip over the stats, nothing particularly exceptional there, and we'll get right into the character attributes. So first up, survivability of 4. This really boils down to just a couple things. The leader has protection in his kit, and he places a whole bunch of debuffs, which is going to feed into weakness. In general, he's just really difficult to kill quickly. There's a lot of other things going on in places, but that is the core of it. He's just difficult to kill quickly. But there are ways to interact with both of those, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go. Damage of 3. The damage is respectable if you really figure out how to play this kit properly. At the upper level, just raw damage is solid. I want to make that clear. But this is not someone that you're going to pick for a vanilla Battlegrounds matchup, right? Definitely closer to Mr. Fantastic in that where some metas are going to supercharge them as defenders. They're serviceable as attackers, but you're going to be using them for specific defenders on the other side, rather than just all right, that's a Mystic, this is the science character I'm using. Like, that's not this. But the damage is there just as long as you learn the skill asks in the kit. That said, if your opponent has a lot of regen or a lot of power gain that you can directly counter, then the leader's going to pop off a bit. I don't think I actually forced myself to get the solo, but this is a character capable of soloing Necropolis fights from my playtesting. Ease of use 3, like we just talked about, reaching the upper levels of the leader's rotation and really getting the damage out there is honestly pretty intense. We'll go over the skill asks a bit later, but there's a lot of light intercepting involved. However, if you are just trying to, control the opponent's regen or power, either one, you don't really care about how quickly you get through the fight, and you are just using him for his utility, then you can just kind of parry, do shortened combos, throw your specials periodically, and the fight will kind of take care of itself. So I really want to isolate the difference there between you're using the leader for his utility, not that difficult to do, and you are really trying to get the best DPS out of the leader, which is quite difficult to do. On that note, we have a utility score of 4. Extremely fair for this character. Really some of the best regen rate control and some of the best power control in the game. And then you combine that with just generally being tanky and having a lot of debuffs. This is a very strong character for that. Defender Strength 3.5. This character does introduce severe debuffs for the first time. They're somewhat similar to Adam Warlock's Sovereign buffs in that they're just more resistant to removal than normal. You could also compare them to the Serpent's Death immunity and how it can't be nullified and staggered but can otherwise be dealt with. That's where severe debuffs are. They can't be cleansed or purified, but all other methods of control are up for grabs. And that makes this a threat, right? Because all of the other threats in this kit rely on those debuffs being there, and you have fewer than normal tools to control them. That means there is some real challenge here. But there are also ways to play around it, and the threats are intentionally not that high. So we land somewhere around a 3.5, and we'll talk about that more as we go. So, strengths. Like I already said, incredibly powerful regen reversal and ability power rate reversal. I need to check the exact ceilings later on, but it's, over 100% reversal potentially of both of these attributes at the same time. So, void levels of control and then some, just really, really strong here. And not only can he deal damage by reversing regen, but he can deal damage by reversing ability power through this new power dissolve effect. So that is kind of the core of his kit, is this control here. Severe debuffs we already talked about. Like I said, can't be removed by Purify or Cleanse. Very similar to Serpent's Death Immunity in that. But you can reduce their duration. You can be immune to them. There are still answers here. And the leader's kit itself gives you a way out for these debuffs. So don't get too concerned about them. And then aggression, which I would maybe rephrase to fight control. The green door, which we haven't talked about yet, is something that's just always in the middle of the map when the leader is here, and it's going to make your opponent more aggressive the closer they are to it, so you can use that as fight control and tempo control, and just in general playing the leader is probably going to have less stalling and less of that kind of frustration than other characters, which is very helpful. And then weaknesses, the same way that we just talked about, that green door works for you, but everything about the kit cares about the green door and where you are in relation to it, one way or another. And so that is going to ask more of you as far as what you have to do with shortening your combos, parrying in specific places, maybe blocking more than you normally would. And that will get in the way of certain fight asks, right? Like, to use the example of one of my least favorite nodes in the game, consistent combos, which requires you to finish 5-hit combos, that would be terrible here. That would be absolutely terrible. But in vanilla fights where you don't need to do that, this is less of a concern, but something to call out there. And then special attack 3 being a big part of his damage loop. Like we said earlier, you can get good damage out of the leader, even without the special 3, by really playing him to his maximum expression, really mastering all of those intercepts. And we'll talk about that as we go. But if that's not working out for you, you probably are going to feel like you want to go to the special 3, and that's going to take a bit more time. I personally don't consider that an issue in Alliance War. I think speed is significantly overblown in Alliance War unless you are literally competing for first. But this is a real drawback in Battlegrounds, right? It's, again, similar to Mr. Fantastic in that. Reed's long-form damage comes from his special 3, and you just don't want to use it in Battlegrounds. So, can be an attacker there, but you have to be careful with it, and then just a little bit slower everywhere else, but not in a way that I think is going to be a problem. And then endurance. This is a small weakness, but it is built into the leader's kit that when your opponent has an endurance passive, which at the moment only Craven does, it's that effect he has that reduces the duration of future non-damaging effects, non-damaging debuffs. That does slow down the leader's rotation and make him a little bit harder to play and weaker as a defender. Not a big thing, but something to keep an eye out for on future characters as well. So, getting into the abilities themselves, we're going to start with the Colossal Cranium here, which is, of course, poison immunity, like the Hulk's. And then, as a defender, while the opponent's regen rate is at or below 0, their willpower mastery is disabled. In prepping for this video, I kind of went back and forth on whether I would address this point, but I know it's going to show up in the comments, so I might as well say it. For anyone asking, why do this for the leader and not for Photon, it's because Photon was supposed to be a more difficult defender. And there are more options for dealing with her debuffs, right? That's the combination of two factors. The leader is not supposed to be a, 4.5 or 5 defender, and so it's fine to let you have more of your willpower. But also there is a trade here in that you cannot purify or cleanse these debuffs. And so it's more important to worry about that management. Additionally, with Photon, remember that every single debuff triggers that Petrify, and so there wouldn't have been much difference between literally this line and what she has. Maybe I shouldn't have even talked about that, but I'm trying to give some insight into the character design process here, and why, crucially, Not all characters are created equal. I mean, outside of that, us as designers, we can make different choices on different characters. We are allowed to do that. But there are real differences here that justify these two different abilities in similar contexts. Anyway, moving on to personal debuffs. All personal debuffs are severe debuffs, which means they cannot be removed by Purifier Cleanse. Like I said earlier, they still can have their duration reduced by Craven, Blade, etc. And I did leave this out earlier, they can have their ability accuracy reduced, so Tranquilize is still an option. There are ways around these, just a bit fewer than normal ones. When either champion lands their first light attack, the leader inflicts a 20% Spectre debuff for 8 seconds. When either champion lands their third light attack, the leader inflicts a 20% Wither for 18 seconds. Both of these stack up to 10, and as a reminder, Spectre reduces regen rate, like OG Guillotine has, and Wither reduces ability power rate, like Spider-Man 2099 has. So this means if you do the math real quick, 20% times 10, both of these can be reduced 200%, meaning that you get 100% reversal. Now, for ability power rate, that's normally going to be pretty clean. Spectre is a little bit more complicated because in PvP contexts, opponents are normally running recovery, meaning that minus 100% reversal is actually going to be minus 85. However, at the same time, you as an attacker should be running the Despair Mastery, which means that minus 85 is actually going to be going down to minus 185, because you get the 200 from these Spectres, and then another 100% reduction from Despair, just because you have so many debuffs on the opponent. So, minus 185% reversal, taking whatever the opponent tries to heal for and almost doubling that as damage, is very, very good. Like we talked about, both of these pieces of control are about as good as anyone else's, and the leader can get them up very, very quickly. You stack these with basics, and there are other ways in the kit to stack even more of them very quickly. So really strong control, important to understand this part of the kit. I also should say here, I mentioned earlier light intercepts. This is why, right? Because within your own basic combo, all you care about when you're playing the leader is your first and third light attack. Meaning that you don't ever really need to throw any mediums, and you never need to throw your fourth light attack just to play the leader. Which means that you can do light, 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 dash back, light, 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 dash back, light, 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 and ramp yourself up very efficiently, benefit from those shortened combos keeping you on top of the green door, benefit from your opponent being more aggressive because they're on top of the green door and make those intercepts easier, and grant your opponent less power because you're doing shortened combos. You'll see as we keep going through the kit why this works so well, but that is kind of the core ask of the leader, that you really stick to those short triple light combos for maximum efficiency. You don't have to, the kit plays fine without it, but if you're trying to get damage and speed out of this character, this is your focus. It's also worth noting that if you are facing the leader on defense, you can invert that and just try to avoid your light attacks. Stick to heavies and mediums for building power and for managing spacing, and you'll never get these debuffs on yourself from the basics. Lastly, for each personal debuff on the opponent, the leader reduces incoming damage from all sources except the special 3 by 1%. As a defender, this becomes 3% against skill champions or 4% against everyone else. So, let's break this down, right? This means that as an attacker, in addition to reducing the opponent's attack by up to 36% because of the Inequity Mastery, the leader is also going to be reducing all incoming damage on top of that by, just look above here, right? We can have up to 20 of these personal debuffs by up to 20%. So that may not sound like an absolute ton, right? You have 36%, you have 20% at max ramp. How much is that really saving you? And the way you do this math is that you take that 36%, you subtract it from 100, and then you divide by that, right? So I take 1 divided by 0.64, and that tells me how much extra health I'm getting from inequity, right? From reducing the opponent's attack, and that's about 56% extra health. That's why I tell everyone to run inequity. That's why it's so important. But if you add in this protection and you get up to a 20% reduction that multiplies with that because it's from a different source at a different point in the damage calculation, then you divide by 0.8 after that, 1 minus 0.2, right? And then you get up to 95.3% extra effective health for the leader. Meaning that if you are staying on top of everything and running the correct masteries, this character effectively has twice as much health as an attacker as it looks like. That's a big part of his survivability. And then you have to look at that as a defender, right? If you're only keeping a few debuffs on yourself at any one point, which is probably what you're going to do, and you're solving for inequity, then maybe he only has like 20% extra effective health when you do this math. But it also means that if you don't control these debuffs, you can theoretically get up to an 80% protection from 10 of each of these, right? 20 total debuffs times 4% against non-skill champions if you're just trying to like nuke this down with a cosmic. And at that point, the leader's going to have roughly 10 times as much effective health. Because an 80% reduction to incoming damage is effectively multiplying health by 5, right? Because you're only taking a fifth of the damage, and you also have inequity increasing effective health by about 50%. So sorry, it's not 10 times, it's about 7.5 times without doing the exact math. I know I said I wasn't going to do really precise math in Patriot Spotlight, but it's important here, okay? This means that if you are not paying attention to this part of the leader's kit, you can be dealing with somebody who has 7.5 times as much health as it looks like they do on paper because of how much your damage is being reduced. And that is why it is very important to pay attention to how to not apply these debuffs by using your mediums and paying attention to how to remove them, which we'll get to later in the kit, or reduce their ability accuracy or duration. All of these things matter because these debuffs on their own won't kill you, but they will make it very difficult to kill the leader quickly, and while that's happening, other threats will come online. Additionally, this kind of protection, just to call it out, will stack with nodes, so if you're facing the leader on like Make a Stand or Ebb and Flow Intercept, it is possible to get down to dealing 0 damage. So take this seriously, take placements like that seriously. You are going to have to answer one part or both. Now next up, Gamma Radiation and the Green Door. This is why the leader cares about all those debuffs, because it fuels that really sweet VFX in the middle of the map, the green door on the floor. You want to keep your opponent on top of this. When fighting the leader, you want to keep on top of this, except for when it's open, and then you want to not be on top of it. And just generally every fight with the leader or against him revolves around this mechanic. So let's dive into it. The leader generates 2 gamma radiation every second. That's just always, right? You can't stop it entirely. And then for each debuff on the opponent, it's generated up to 180% faster, 15% for each debuff. This mechanic is not only listening for non-damaging debuffs, it's not only listening for personal debuffs. So be careful with this one. Nodes are going to compound it. The green door, like we said, is located in the center of the stage. It begins closed and is then opened when the leader reaches 100 gamma radiation. Defenders are more aggressive the closer they are to the green door. So going towards either wall, they'll be less aggressive. Not necessarily passive, but just less aggressive than they would be on top of the green door. I want to make that point because I don't want you to think about this like oscillate, where they'll be less aggressive than normal if you just push them to the wall. They'll be normal at the walls and more aggressive on top of the door. And then while the door is opened, 6 gamma radiation is consumed every second. Pause during the leader's special attacks, and when you get down to 0, the door closes again. Once the door is closed, the leader can't generate gamma radiation for 4 seconds, or, this is the endurance hook, if the opponent has endurance active, this becomes 12. When the green door is opened, the leader gains a Fury passive for each personal debuff on the opponent, lasting until the green door is closed. These are small Fury passives. I believe this is just 1% of his base attack, but you can have a lot of them, right? And if you can keep the green door open for a long time by throwing your special attacks and, pausing that out, you can hold on to these Furies for a good while. Now, while the green door is closed, we have attacker and defender clauses here. As an attacker, when the opponent activates a special attack while standing on the closed green door, they're inflicted with 2 personal Wither and Spectre debuffs. This is maybe the most important thing to really pay attention to as an attacker, is not only keeping your combos short, but keeping your combos short as a way of trying to make sure that your opponent is on top of the green door when they throw their special attacks. They're more likely to do that because they're aggressive, but you want to make sure they're there because it's going to ramp them as much as 2 of your 3-hit combos. And then as a defender, while somebody attacking into the leader is standing on that closed green door, then one of his personal debuffs gets absorbed every 2 seconds, or every 1 second against skill champions. There's no penalty to this, they just go away. So this means that you can use light attacks. You just have to be sparing with it, and you have to stay on top of the green door to control them. Like I said, the severe debuffs are a real threat, but you have the keys to play around them as long as you play the leader's game. And that's kind of the point of this kit as a defender. He's going to stall you out, he's going to force you to play by his rules, because if you don't play by his rules, he's also going to, guess what, stall you out. So one way or another, unless you have a really hard RPG counter to these debuffs, you're going to have to pay attention to what the leader wants you to do. Now, while the green door is opened, whenever a non-damaging debuff is inflicted, you get an extra Fury passive, so this is going to let you go above the 20 that you can start with. And when the leader's opponent is standing on top of this green door, every half second they're inflicted with an instant degen for each debuff. So this can scale pretty nuttily, right? Because not only is this number multiplied by each of up to 20 debuffs on them, plus this one isn't personal debuffs, right? So again, you could have other debuffs from masteries, nodes, etc. It's also going to be increased by all of your Furies. So these degens can get very real, and similarly, if you're fighting the leader, this is why you want to stay all the way off the green door while it's open. Bide your time, don't get anywhere near it, because these start to hurt. And then whenever the opponent gains 1 combo, remove 1 gamma radiation. So this means that any character that gains combo more quickly can close the door pretty quick. You just have to make sure that gaining that combo doesn't put you over the door, right? So being really aggressive with someone is only going to be good if you're pushing the leader past the door on the other side. So keep that in mind. Whatever character you're bringing to the leader, make sure that you can access the utility that you want without standing on top of the open door. And then if you are attacking with the leader, obviously you just want to keep the opponent on top of the door. You shorten your combos, you throw your specials only where you want to, maybe after backing away from the door so that your opponents come after you, and then your specials put them on the door. These are all things you pay a lot of attention to. Now, both specials have fairly long animations and knock the opponent back a fair amount. So when you're attacking into leader, this is going to make it difficult to keep him at the far wall, and he's going to keep trying to push you back towards the green door. If you're playing with the leader, you have to be careful not to spam these indiscriminately because you may push the opponent away from the green door in the other direction. And you want to make sure that you're giving them time to run back towards you with that aggression so that they can then melt that much faster by standing on top of what's effectively a door to hell. Now, the special one, this is your anti-regen special, right? Each hit inflicts one personal specter, and these can be inflicted through block. I know that people are going to ask, you'll see it in the deep dive, but this animation, it is possible to full dex it. It's a tricky dex if you're at the wall, but it can just be outranged. However, it's important to note, if you're outranging it, then you might be at risk of standing on top of the green door because you backed up so much, so just pay attention to that. And then on the final hit, if the opponent's regen rate is at or below 0, inflict a Vitality passive for 9 seconds. So we have to talk about a distinction here. Vitality increases the potency of regen effects. That is not the same as increasing regen rate, right? So let's say that I have a regen effect that gives me 10 health per second, right? Vitality is going to increase that to 12.5, but it's going to increase it to 12.5 as the strength of the effect itself. Then you imagine that getting kind of projected through a window or a mirror, a lens, right? That is regen rate. It can either be magnified by the regen rate or minimized and even inverted by the regen rate. But they're two separate parts of the calculation. The vitality makes the real thing bigger, and then the regen rate makes its effect on your health bar bigger, smaller, or even negative. So that means that if you're reversing the opponent's regen rate like the leader wants to do, making the, quote, real thing bigger is also going to make the reversal of that regen bigger. So this is just more damage for the leader. I realize that this stuff gets a little bit complex. The leader's playing in some interesting game design spaces, so this video is probably going to be on the long side. Special 2 is your power control special, right? Each hit inflicts one personal wither debuff. These do not go through block, which is a good thing because this is a very difficult full dex. It's possible, but it's very difficult. And on the final hit, if the opponent's ability power rate is at or below 0, which it often will be because of how many withers this applies, then you inflict a non-stacking power dissolve debuff for 18 seconds. So what this does is every time the opponent tries to gain power and fails, they take damage. This is also another personal debuff, and so it will contribute to the leader's protection and other abilities, all that kinds of stuff. The damage inflicted by this is pretty significant. This is a big part of what I was saying about this guy can solo Necropolis fights. It's not just regen reversal. A lot of it is weaponizing power gain through this debuff. It really adds up. I think the way that I would try to conceptually think about this is that it's like a cousin to Power Sting, if that makes sense. Because one way or another, you are weaponizing how much power the opponent is trying to gain. With a Power Sting, you let them gain the power and then punish them for using it. With the leader, with Power Dissolve, you prevent them from gaining the power and punish them for having the audacity to try, right? It's a very fun gameplay loop. And it's very satisfying to pull off. Regen reversal is fun, but honestly, the special 2 is my favorite part about leader. I just love chasing like Dragon Man, Mangog, that kind of thing, and just killing them with their own power gain. Very fun. Next up, we have the special 3, which we talked about doesn't really have the utility asks of the first 2, but if you don't need the Wither or the Spectre for anything in particular, you're keeping those up just with your light intercepts and that kind of thing, well then the special 3 is more damage, right? Especially if your opponent doesn't have their own sources of regen or power gain for you to turn around with the special 1 or 2. The special 3 just puts a giant degen debuff on them, which again is a personal debuff, so it's going to feed into those parts of the kit. And if you do this while the green door is open, you get extra Fury passives and inflict a degen vulnerability passive, which is going to boost all of those instant degens from keeping your opponent on top of the green door. Because this is indefinite, you can do this over and over again and keep boosting not just those instant degens, but also the next time you throw the giant degen debuff from this special. This is kind of a long fight thing. You wouldn't do this multiple times in Battlegrounds. You might do it multiple times in War, but this allows the damage to get really serious in longer fights. It's also worth noting this Special 3 animation, like most, puts you right in the center of the stage, so you can throw it anywhere on the map and then boop, you're back on top of the green door. That's also something to be very careful of when you're attacking the leader, is that you may have been able to move away from the green door, but most special attacks are going to put you back on top of it. If the door is closed, that might be what you want, because then it's going to allow you to get those debuffs removed. But if the door is open, be very careful using your Special 3. Lastly, signature ability, Enigmatic Machinations of the Mind. When the leader has at least 12 personal debuffs on the opponent, he gains a steadfast passive, and this only has to be 4 against Mystic champions. If this looks similar to the way Patriot Steadfast works, well, sometimes we share stuff. Anyway, this is very powerful, right? The leader can get to 12 pretty quickly. That's a few of those triple light combos. That's a couple special attacks the opponent throws. Boom, you're at 12, you get a steadfast, even easier against mystics. And then you can block unblockables, because as a reminder, that's what steadfast does. This is very, very helpful for certain nodes, like node 10 in Alliance War, which is vigorous assault and masochism over time, right? First up, the leader's personal debuffs can't be purified, and so masochism over time won't trigger off of them in the first place. But what you can do is you can stack up his personal debuffs first, and then you can freely parry the opponent, because even though they will purify the parry stun, you can block unblockable. And you're reversing their regen as you go. Or actually, that node may have Indomitable. But you get the point. You're at least controlling the regen. And so this SIG ability makes the leader very strong against those kinds of nodes, whether it's Path 1 on Alliance War or just other similar effects. As a damage boost, Personal Fury effects have a duration of 6 seconds and are paused while the green door is active, up to 6 seconds. This basically doesn't change how it works while the green door is there, but then you get kind of a holdover after it closes of holding onto your Furies. You won't have the instant degens anymore, but your basic attacks are just going to do that much more. And then intercepting the opponent with a light attack has up to a 100% chance to randomly inflict a personal Spectre or Wither. So normally you're doing your 3-hit light intercept backdraft combos and you're getting 1 Spectre and 1 Wither. This is going to make it 3 total debuffs. You don't know which of the others you're going to get, but it's going to ramp you up to 50% faster overall. Moving on to the synergies, we have new Intelligentsia Takedown with Elsa, Bloodstone, and Moleman. Leader inflicting a personal Wither or Spectre debuff pauses his power dissolve. Not for a long time, but if you can stay on top of those short combos, those quick light intercepts, you can add quite a bit of extra duration to the power dissolve. For Elsa, performing a personal counter evade pauses personal debuffs for 3 seconds. This is going to give you better uptime on your busters for more damage. This is going to give you better uptime on your cold snap if you're using her as an evade counter. Very helpful to her overall loop. And then firing a Hellfire round or Behemoth Buster with a basic attack shortens the evade cooldown by 1 second. So you can't just spam this cooldown reduction with the specials. It does have to be with your combo enders. But if you throw more M2s or L4s to apply these rounds, you can get that counter evade more often, which is great for Elsa in general because it's more control of the fight and less block damage. And it's going to give you access to that pause more often, so you have even better uptime on all of her debuffs. This isn't busted broken. It doesn't make her stuff permanent, but it is very, very good for her. And then for Moleman, personal shocks are paused during Moleman's special attacks. If you're familiar with Mole Man, he has access to some burst damage when his shocks are active. This holds on to those shocks longer. Need a good lawyer with She-Hulk. For the leader, inflicting a personal wither or specter pauses his vitality passive for 1.5 seconds. So, very similar to the one we just saw, just aimed at the regen instead of the ability power. And then for She-Hulk, while the opponent is affected with a regen effect and She-Hulk's personal petrify is active, personal furies expire 35% more slowly. So this is pretty big because it means that if you are using Jen for her petrify, which is generally a little tricky to maintain without losing your furies because you're not ramping those furies with a special one, you're not knocking down the opponent as often, etc. This is going to make it that much easier to hold onto your furies and therefore to keep your ramp going while just spamming special 2, as long as the opponent is healing, right? So this is potentially very, very good for her. Bestowed by the one below all with a bunch of gamma mutates. Basically Hulk and the Abominations, but not all of them. As long as you have them on your team, all hashtag Gamma champions get 5% increased attack rating for each Gamma champ on the team. So this doesn't turn on if you bring like Gladiator Hulk, but it will still benefit him on the team as long as you have leader and one of these 4 named champions. So you can get a nice big Gamma team going. And this is a pretty big list of powerful champions. As a reminder for those of you who maybe don't play Cheelf that much, this includes Absorbing Man and Sasquatch over on the Mystic side. You can get some very strong characters that would love extra attack. A fair bit of it through this synergy. Intelligentsia old and new with MODOK, Doctor Doom, and Mr. Sinister. You get perfect block chance. And then Ross's Thunderbolts. All champions gain armor rating with Red Hulk, Deadpool, Punisher, and Ghost Rider. And both of these last two, as a reminder, are generic synergies, so it really does mean all champions on your team as long as you turn it on. It's not just restricted to the named synergy champions. And then that is leader. I've talked about it as we've gone through. You should be running Despair and Inequity at a high level anyway. If you're not, start working towards them. They're really good on this guy. The relics don't really matter. Pick one that feels good for you. But I think you kind of get the point of what this character is doing, right? They're going to be an annoying stall defender. They're not impossible by any means. There are plenty of existing counters. There will be more. But they do slow the opponent down if they don't have a counter, and that can win you around. They're going to be useful on offense in Battlegrounds from time to time when you have a matchup that he can really capitalize on. I think they're going to be quite helpful in Alliance War, especially on Path 1, but in general, chasing after some of those mystic placements that love to purify things is going to be that much better. And then I think in long-form content and general questing, the leader's going to feel really good, right? That's one of those things that has always felt good about Void, Mr. Fantastic, etc., is that you run into really strong healing, right? You run into really strong power control. And that's one of those problems that I see players ask about on the official Discord, on Reddit, etc., with some frequency is, how on earth do I deal with this? By ranking utility champions like this, right? The leader is really good for that. And on top of that, the leader's gameplay is just an absolute freaking blast. Like, I've talked about it as something to work on, but I also really just want to underline that it's very fun. Your opponent stays more aggressive, the tempo of the fight stays quick, all of that is fun in the first place. And then you're just cheekily intercepting the opponent with these lights while on top of this giant glowing green thing under both of y'all's feet that eventually is going to explode and start degenning them to death. Like, it's just a cool fight. So I hope y'all enjoy the leader. Find places to use them. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments. And until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.